What happens when the town's most ridiculed woman becomes untouchable overnight? When a scarred stranger walks into a harvest dance, claims the girl nobody wants as his wife, and forces an entire town to swallow their cruelty? This is the story of Lila Hart, the woman Cedar Falls loved to mock, and Rowan Hale, a mountain recluse haunted by ghosts he couldn't save. It's a tale of fake vows that became real promises, of dignity found in deception, and love born from the ashes of shame. Follow this journey to the end, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The harvest moon hung fat and golden over Cedar Falls, Wyoming, casting long shadows across the barn where the entire town had gathered for the annual harvest dance of 1887. Lanterns swung from rough-hewn beams, their warm light flickering across faces flushed with cider and laughter. The fiddle sang out bright and wild, accompanied by the stomp of boots on wooden planks and the swirl of calico skirts spinning like flowers in a wind. And there, on a bench pushed against the far wall where the lantern light barely reached, sat Lila Hart. She wore her best dress, a blue calico she'd sewn herself with meticulous care, each stitch a small prayer that maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. The fabric brought out what little color there was in her pale cheeks, and she'd arranged her dark hair as prettily as she could manage. She'd even dared to hope, getting ready in her small room above the mercantile where she worked, that perhaps someone might ask her to dance, that perhaps someone might see past her body to the person living inside it. That hope had died approximately 30 minutes after her arrival. Now she sat with her hands folded in her lap, fingers twisting the fabric of her skirt, watching the town celebrate around her as if she were invisible. Worse than invisible. She was visible enough to be deliberately avoided, like a mud puddle in the middle of a road that everyone stepped carefully around. "Lord, would you look at that?" a voice carried from near the refreshment table, just loud enough for Lila to hear. "She actually came. Takes some nerve, don't it?" "Wearing her Sunday best, too," another voice chimed in, female this time, dripping with false sympathy. Bless her heart. Lila's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes fixed on her lap. She'd learned long ago that reacting only made it worse. The phrase, "bless her heart," in Cedar Falls was like a knife wrapped in velvet. It sounded kind, but cut just as deep. She shouldn't have come. She'd known it even as she'd put on the dress, even as she'd walked the 3 blocks from her tiny room to the barn. But the alternative, spending another Saturday night alone, listening to the distant sounds of music and laughter, had seemed somehow worse than enduring this. At least here she was technically part of something, even if that something was the town's favorite object of pity and ridicule. "Miss Hart!" A bright voice cut through her thoughts, and Lila looked up to find Mary Thornton approaching, her pretty face arranged in an expression of exaggerated concern. 2 other young women flanked her, barely suppressing their giggles. "We were just saying how brave you are to come tonight, aren't we, girls?" "So brave," one of them echoed, her eyes dancing with malice. Lila forced a thin smile. "Good evening, Miss Thornton." "That's such a lovely dress," Mary continued, reaching out to touch the fabric with her fingertips, as if examining livestock. "Did you make it yourself?" "I thought so. You can always tell homemade from store-bought, can't you, girls? It has a certain rustic quality." The other women tittered behind their hands. "If you'll excuse me." Lila started to stand, but Mary's hand landed on her shoulder, pressing her back down with surprising firmness. "Oh, don't leave on our account. We were just being friendly. You know, I was telling the girls, it's such a shame about your situation. A woman your age, still unmarried, still living above the mercantile like some, well..." She let the sentence dangle, unfinished but perfectly clear. "But I suppose not everyone is meant for marriage and family, are they? Some people have other purposes." "Mary, leave her be." This came from Sarah Bentley, one of the few women in town who'd ever shown Lila genuine kindness. She appeared at Mary's elbow, her expression stern. "Don't you have somewhere else to spread your Christian charity?" Mary's smile turned brittle. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Mrs. Bentley. We were just chatting." "Then go chat elsewhere." With a huff of indignation, Mary swept away, her companions trailing behind like ducklings. Sarah gave Lila's arm a gentle squeeze before moving on herself, called away by her husband across the barn. Lila sat very still, willing herself not to cry. She would not cry. She'd survived worse than Mary Thornton's particular brand of cruelty. She'd survived 23 years in Cedar Falls, 23 years of being the fat girl nobody wanted, the daughter of a mother who died of shame, and a father who'd drunk himself to death rather than face a town that had never let him forget his daughter's shortcomings. She'd survived becoming an orphan at 16, survived 7 years of working at Calder's Mercantile, for wages barely enough to keep her fed and sheltered, survived being passed over and looked through and laughed at more times than she could count. She could survive one more harvest dance. The fiddle launched into a reel, and the dancers whooped and spun faster. Lila watched them with something that wasn't quite envy. She'd long ago given up wanting what they had. It was more a distant wondering, like observing a species she'd never be part of. What did it feel like, she wondered, to move through the world with that kind of confidence, to be wanted, chosen, celebrated? Well, well, well. A new voice, male and thick with malice, made her stomach drop. If it ain't Lila Hart, sitting all alone, now that's a surprise. Cole Danner loomed over her, his face red from exertion and alcohol. At 25, he was the town's unofficial ringleader of cruelty, the kind of man who'd never outgrown being a schoolyard bully. His father owned the largest ranch in the territory, which made Cole untouchable in Cedar Falls society, free to torment whomever he pleased without consequence. And he'd always particularly enjoyed tormenting Lila. "Mr. Danner," Lila said quietly, eyes fixed on a point past his shoulder, "I hope you're enjoying the dance." "Oh, I am. But you know what would make it even better?" He leaned in close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Seeing you out there on the floor. Come on, boys." He raised his voice, calling to his friends who had gathered nearby, sensing entertainment. "Don't you think Miss Hart here deserves a dance?" "That's mighty charitable of you, Cole," one of them called back. "I don't want to dance, thank you," Lila said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Now don't be modest." Cole's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, his grip bruising. "A lady at a dance ought to dance. It's only proper." "Let me go." Lila tried to pull away, but his fingers only tightened. "What's wrong? Scared you'll break the floorboards?" This drew laughter from his companions, emboldening him. "Come on, we'll all take a turn. Consider it our good deed for the week." He yanked, hard enough to pull her halfway off the bench. Other people were starting to notice now, turning to watch with expressions ranging from uncomfortable sympathy to barely concealed amusement. No one moved to help. No one ever did, not when Cole Danner was involved. "Please." Lila hated the pleading note in her voice, hated that he could reduce her to this so easily. The lady said no. The voice cut through the barn like a blade. Quiet, but with such cold authority that the music actually faltered. Everyone turned to look at the source. A man stood just inside the barn entrance, and Lila's first thought was that he looked like something carved from the mountains themselves. Tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn buckskin and a heavy coat despite the warmth of the evening. Dark hair touched with gray fell past his collar, and a full beard couldn't quite hide the scars that marked the left side of his face, one running from temple to jaw, another across his cheekbone. His eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and piercing, and they were fixed on Cole Danner with an expression that made the younger man's grip on Lila's wrist slacken. "This ain't your concern, friend," Cole said, but his bravado had lost its edge. The stranger walked forward with the unhurried gait of a man who'd never run from anything in his life. The crowd parted before him like water around a stone. He didn't stop until he stood directly in front of Cole, and Lila noticed with a strange detachment that he was several inches taller than the rancher's son. "Actually," the stranger said, his voice still quiet but somehow filling the entire barn, "it is my concern, seeing as you're manhandling my wife." The words fell into the sudden silence like stones into still water. For a moment no one moved, no one breathed, then everyone spoke at once. "Wife? Did he say wife? Lila Hart is married." Lila herself could only stare, her mind refusing to process what she'd just heard. The stranger's eyes met hers for the briefest moment, and she saw something there. A question, perhaps, or a request. Then he reached into his coat pocket and produced a simple gold band. "I apologize for the delay in making our arrangement public," he said, addressing the room at large but looking at Cole. "But that's my wife you're touching. I'd appreciate it if you'd let her go." Cole released Lila's wrist so fast she nearly fell. "I didn't. Nobody said." How was I supposed to know? Now you do. The stranger extended his hand toward Lila. Come here, darling. Lila stood on legs that felt like water, her mind screaming that this was insane, impossible, some kind of trick. But that hand remained steady, waiting, and in his eyes she saw something that made her take it. Not pity, not mockery, but a kind of iron determination that suggested he would stand there all night if necessary. His hand was rough with calluses, warm and solid, and it completely engulfed hers. He drew her gently to his side, and then, before God and all of Cedar Falls, he took that gold ring and slid it onto her left hand. It fit perfectly. There, he said softly, just to her. That's better. Then he turned back to Cole, who had gone an interesting shade of purple. I believe you owe my wife an apology. That is, Cole sputtered, looking around wildly for support, but his friends had suddenly found other places to be. How was I supposed to know she was married? She never said nothing about no husband. Is that how your father raised you? Grab first, ask questions later? The stranger's voice remained mild, but something in his eyes made Cole take a step back. An apology. Now. Sorry, Cole muttered, not looking at Lila. Look at her when you say it. Cole's jaw clenched, but he met Lila's eyes. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Apology accepted, Lila heard herself say, though her voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. The stranger nodded once, then turned back to the room at large. Mrs. Whitcomb, the town's self-appointed moral authority, had pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her face sharp with suspicion. I'm sure we're all very surprised by this news, she said, her voice acid-sweet. Lila, dear, I had no idea you were courting. You certainly kept it quiet. My fault, the stranger said before Lila could respond. I'm a private man, Mrs. Whitcomb. And you are? Rowan Hale. He offered a slight nod, the barest acknowledgement of civility. I have a claim up in the high country. Don't get to town often. Clearly not often enough to observe proper protocols, Mrs. Whitcomb sniffed. A wedding without announcement, without ceremony, We had a ceremony. This came from an unexpected source. Amos Calder, owner of the mercantile where Lila worked, stepped forward from where he'd been watching near the wall. He was a quiet man in his 60s, widowed, known more for his fair dealing than his conversation. I stood witness. About 6 weeks back, wasn't it, Lila? Lila's mind reeled. Mr. Calder was lying for her. Stern, honest Amos Calder was standing before the entire town and lying. Yes, she managed. 6 weeks. You stood witness and said nothing? Mrs. Whitcomb's voice rose an octave. Wasn't my news to tell, Calder replied mildly. They asked me to keep it quiet, and I did. No law against a private wedding. Well, Mrs. Whitcomb looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. I suppose there isn't, though I must say it all seems highly irregular. Most things in life are irregular if you look at them close enough, Rowan Hale said. He placed a hand at the small of Lila's back, a gesture so casually proprietary that it sent a shiver through her entire body. Now, if you'll excuse us, I'd like to dance with my wife. That's why I came all this way, after all. He guided her toward the dance floor before anyone could protest. The other dancers had cleared a space, whether out of respect or shock, Lila couldn't tell. The fiddle player, after a moment's hesitation, struck up a waltz. Rowan turned to face her, and Lila realized with a jolt of panic that she had no idea what to do. She'd never danced with anyone in her life. She'd practiced alone in her room sometimes, humming to herself, but this? Follow my lead, he murmured, so low only she could hear. Left hand on my shoulder. I'll do the rest. His right hand found her waist. His left took her right hand, and then they were moving. Lila stumbled on the first step, certain she would embarrass them both, but his grip was firm and sure, guiding her through the pattern with a patience that made something crack open in her chest. He danced as he seemed to do everything else, with quiet competence and absolute confidence. And he looked at her while they danced, really looked at her, as if she were the only person in the barn. Not with desire exactly, but with a kind of steady attention that Lila had never experienced before, like she was worth looking at, worth seeing. Why? She whispered as they turned. Why are you doing this? His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. I had a daughter once, he said quietly. She was built like you, strong, solid, meant for hard work and long life. But she was young and didn't understand that yet, didn't know her own worth. And there were people, like that boy back there, who made sure she never got the chance to figure it out. Lila's throat tightened. What happened to her? She died 10 years ago. 17 years old. The words were flat, emotionless, but Lila could feel the weight of old grief beneath them. I wasn't there to stop what happened. Couldn't protect her from their cruelty. He paused, guiding her through a turn. I won't stand by and watch it happen again. But marriage, that's not protection, that's pretend, he said simply. For tonight. Maybe longer if you want. A woman with a husband gets treated different than a woman alone. You know that's true. Lila did know. She'd watched it her whole life. How marriage transformed a woman's position in town, gave her a shield of respectability and protection that nothing else could provide. And what do you get out of it? She asked, because kindness without cost made no sense in her experience. Peace of mind, Rowan replied. The knowledge that I did something this time instead of nothing. That enough? The waltz ended. The barn erupted in applause, whether for the musicians or the spectacle of Lila Hart dancing, she couldn't tell. Rowan released her slowly, as if giving her time to step away if she wanted to. She didn't step away. Yes, she heard herself say. That's enough. His mouth quirked in what might have been a smile beneath the beard. Good. Now, I think my wife ought to eat something. You had supper yet? The word wife sent another strange thrill through her. No. Then let's fix that. He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Lila took it. They walked together toward the refreshment table, and Lila felt the weight of dozens of eyes on them, heard the whispers starting up like a swarm of bees. But with Rowan Hale's solid presence beside her, the whispers felt different somehow, less like judgment, more like wonder. At the table, he filled a plate without asking what she wanted. Cornbread, roasted chicken, potatoes swimming in gravy, apple pie. More food than she would have dared take for herself under the watchful eyes of the town. When he handed it to her, she hesitated. I couldn't possibly. People will what? His voice was mild, but there was steel underneath. Judge you for eating? Let them. You're a grown woman who's been working all day. Eat. So she did. They found seats on a hay bale away from the worst of the crowd, and Lila ate while Rowan sat beside her, a silent sentinel. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, no one made a comment. No one giggled behind their hands. No one suggested that maybe she'd had enough. Mary Thornton walked past with her nose in the air, but she didn't stop. Cole Danner stayed on the opposite side of the barn. Mrs. Whitcomb watched with narrow eyes, but kept her distance. You should know, Lila said quietly, setting down her empty plate. Everyone's going to ask questions, want details. They won't just accept this without... Then we'd better have our story straight, Rowan said. He stood and offered his hand again. Walk with me? They left the barn through a side door, escaping into the cool night air. The sounds of the dance faded behind them as they walked past the church, past the schoolhouse, toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie. The harvest moon lit their path in shades of silver and shadow. Finally, Rowan stopped beneath an old cottonwood tree, its leaves whispering in the night breeze. He leaned against the trunk and studied her in the moonlight. We need a story, he said. Something simple, easy to remember. Lila nodded, her mind still trying to catch up with everything that had happened in the last hour. How did we meet? At Calder's store. I came in for supplies back in June. You helped me find what I needed, and we got to talking. About what? He considered. Books. You strike me as someone who reads. I do, Lila admitted, surprised he'd guessed. Whenever I can afford them. Then we talked about books. I mentioned I had a small library up at my cabin, offered to lend you some. You took me up on it. And then? Then I kept finding reasons to come to town. To see you. We'd meet. He glanced around. Here, maybe. Under this tree. Private-like. Lila felt heat rise to her cheeks at the implication. And people believed we were courting without noticing? You're quiet. I'm private. Makes sense we'd keep it to ourselves. He paused. After a few months, I asked you to marry me. You said yes. We kept it simple, just called her as witness, like he said. Didn't want a fuss. Why wouldn't we want a fuss? Rowan's scarred face was difficult to read in the shadows, but his voice was gentle. Because you've been hurt enough by this town. Didn't want to give them the chance to ruin it with their talk and their opinions. Wanted something that was just ours. The words hit Lila like a physical blow. Their simple kindness, the way they took her pain and made it part of the story instead of pretending it didn't exist. You're good at this, she managed. I've had a long time to think about what I should have done different, what I would do if I ever got another chance. He straightened from the tree. So that's our story. We fell in love quiet-like, got married simple, and now we're letting folks know because I got tired of watching other men put their hands on my wife. How long? Lila swallowed. How long do we keep this up? Long as you want. Could be just tonight. Give you a night where you're not the town joke, where you get treated like a person instead of a punchline. Could be longer. Could be I come to town every month or so, play the husband, keep folks off your back. He met her eyes. Could be forever, if it suits you. I got no one waiting on me, and you clearly got no one here treating you right. But what about, wouldn't you want a real wife? Someone you actually... I had a wife, Rowan said quietly. Buried her next to our daughter. Don't have the heart for that kind of love again. But I got plenty of heart for making sure decent people don't get crushed by cruel ones. That's a kind of marriage too, isn't it? Partnership, protection, mutual respect. Lila thought about her little room above the mercantile. Thought about 7 more years of Mary Thornton's poisoned sympathy and Cole Danner's entitled grabbing. Thought about growing old alone in a town that had never wanted her, dying one day with nothing to show for her life but a gravestone that no one would visit. Then she thought about the way Rowan had looked at her while they danced, like she mattered, like she was worth defending. How do I know you're not... She hesitated. That this isn't some kind of joke? Something you and Cole cooked up to humiliate me worse? Rowan reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. From it, he withdrew a daguerreotype in a tarnished frame. He held it out to Lila. In the moonlight, she could make out the image. A younger Rowan, barely recognizable without the scars and gray in his hair, standing beside a plump woman with kind eyes. Between them stood a girl of perhaps 15, round-faced and smiling, her body soft and sturdy. That's them, Rowan said. Sarah and Emma. Took that picture a month before Emma died. Sarah followed 6 months later, said dying of a broken heart was a cliché, but she did it anyway. His voice remained steady, but Lila could hear the fault lines beneath. I got nothing left to lose, Miss Hart, and nothing to gain from hurting you. I'm offering you exactly what I said, protection from cruelty, respect from a town that ain't never given you any, and a way to live with your head up instead of down. That's all. Lila looked at the photograph, at the happy family frozen in silver and time, and felt tears prick her eyes. I'm sorry for your loss. So am I. He tucked the daguerreotype back into his coat. But loss don't have to be the end of everything. Sometimes it's the beginning of something different. They stood in silence for a long moment, the distant sounds of the dance drifting on the night air. Then Lila took the gold ring off her finger and held it up to the moonlight. This is real gold, she said. You just gave me real gold. Seemed appropriate. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Where did you get it? Made it. Got a small forge at my cabin. Not much else to do during winter besides read and tinker. Lila slid the ring back onto her finger, felt its unfamiliar weight settle into place. I'll wear it, she said, for tonight. And then, we'll see. Rowan nodded. Fair enough. Now, we should get back before people start talking about what we might be doing out here in the dark. The comment startled a laugh out of Lila, her first genuine laugh of the evening. They're already talking. We just gave them enough material for 6 months' worth of gossip. Then let's give them a little more. He offered his arm again, and they walked back to the barn together. When they entered, Lila noticed the change immediately. People didn't look away when she met their eyes. They nodded, offered tentative smiles, made space for her and Rowan to pass. She was no longer invisible, no longer something to be avoided or mocked. She was someone's wife. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Rowan danced with her twice more, each time with that same steady competence that made her feel graceful instead of awkward. He brought her cider and sat beside her during the group songs. When Mr. Patterson, the banker, approached to offer congratulations, Rowan shook his hand and made polite conversation about weather and market prices as if he'd been doing this his whole life. Sarah Bentley pulled Lila aside at one point, her eyes bright with curiosity. "You dark horse," she said, squeezing Lila's hand. "Married 6 weeks and never said a word." "I wanted to keep it private," Lila said, repeating the story they'd crafted. "Well, I think it's wonderful. He seems like a good man, strong. And the way he looks at you," Sarah sighed dramatically, "that's a man who knows what he wants." Lila managed to smile, wondering what Sarah would think if she knew the truth. But the truth was impossible to explain, perhaps even to herself. In the space of 2 hours, her entire world had shifted on its axis. As the evening wound down and people began hitching their wagons for the journey home, Rowan drew Lila aside once more. "I'll be heading back up to the mountain tonight," he said. "Got supplies to haul, and I don't like leaving my stock too long." Lila felt a strange pang of disappointment. "Oh, but I'll be back in 4 weeks, first Thursday of November. I'll come by the mercantile for supplies." He reached up and gently adjusted the ring on her finger. "If you're still wearing this, I'll know you want to keep going. If not, well, we had tonight at least." "And if I am wearing it?" His winter sky eyes held hers. "Then we figure out what comes next." He walked her back to the mercantile, through streets gone quiet and empty. At the door to her upstairs room, he paused. "Thank you," Lila said softly. "For tonight. For everything." "Don't thank me yet," Rowan replied. "We might have just made your life a whole lot more complicated. Or a whole lot better." He smiled then, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and transformed his scarred face into something almost boyish. "Or that. Good night, Mrs. Hale." "Good night." Lila climbed the stairs to her room and closed the door behind her. She stood in the darkness for a long moment, then lit her lamp and held up her left hand to the light. The gold ring gleamed warm and solid, a circle of impossible possibility. Outside, she heard the sound of a horse's hooves heading out of town, toward the mountains, toward a cabin she'd never seen, occupied by a man she'd known for less than 4 hours. A man who'd called her his wife, who'd danced with her like she was precious, who'd looked at her and seen someone worth protecting. Lila touched the ring with her right hand, turning it slowly on her finger. 4 weeks. 28 days to decide if this beautiful, impossible lie was worth turning into truth. She looked at herself in the small mirror above her wash basin, the same face she'd seen every day of her life, unremarkable and plain. But something was different now. Something in her eyes, perhaps, or the set of her shoulders. For the first time in her 23 years, Lila Hart looked like a woman who belonged somewhere, to someone. Even if that somewhere and someone were a carefully constructed fiction, it felt more real than anything else in her life had ever been. She got ready for bed slowly, methodically, but she didn't take off the ring. And when she finally blew out the lamp and climbed beneath her worn quilt, she held her left hand up to where moonlight streamed through the window, watching the gold band catch and hold the light. 4 weeks. She'd give him 4 weeks. And somewhere in the darkness, Lila Hart smiled. The next morning arrived with the harsh clarity of autumn sunlight streaming through Lila's window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny witnesses to her impossible situation. She woke with her left hand still raised on the pillow beside her face, the gold ring catching the light exactly as it had in the moonlight hours before. For a disorienting moment, she wondered if the entire evening had been a dream, some elaborate fantasy conjured by a lonely mind desperate for escape. Then she heard the voices downstairs. "Well, I'm just saying, it seems mighty convenient that nobody knew anything about this supposed marriage until last night." Mrs. Whitcomb's distinctive nasal tone carried clearly through the floorboards. She must have come into the mercantile the moment Mr. Calder opened for business. "And I'm just saying," came Mr. Calder's patient reply, "that a man and woman's private business is exactly that, private. Now, did you need something, Mrs. Whitcomb? Or did you come in just to gossip?" "I came for thread." And it's not gossip if it's legitimate concern for the moral welfare of this community. Lila sat up slowly, her heart beginning to pound. This was it. The beginning of the scrutiny she'd known would come. The entire town would be dissecting last night, looking for cracks in the story, searching for proof that she was still the pathetic, unwanted Lila Hart they'd always known, and that Rowan Hale was either a fool or a fraud. She dressed quickly in her work clothes, a simple brown dress far less pretty than last night's blue calico, and braided her hair with fingers that trembled only slightly. When she looked in the mirror, she expected to see the same old Lila staring back. Instead, she saw a woman wearing a wedding ring. The cognitive dissonance made her dizzy. Downstairs, Mr. Calder looked up from the counter where he'd been measuring out thread for Mrs. Whitcomb. His weathered face was carefully neutral, but Lila caught the slight nod he gave her. Acknowledgement, perhaps even approval. "Good morning, Lila," he said, and she noticed he didn't use Miss before her name. "Good morning, Mr. Calder." Lila moved to tie on her apron, acutely aware of Mrs. Whitcomb's sharp eyes tracking her every movement. "Mrs. Hale," Mrs. Whitcomb said, making the title sound like an accusation. "How lovely to see you this morning. I trust you slept well after all the excitement?" "Very well, thank you." "I'm sure. It must have been quite a relief to finally reveal your secret." Mrs. Whitcomb's smile was thin as paper. "Though I must say I'm surprised you chose the harvest dance for your announcement, such a public venue for such a private couple." Lila felt her face grow warm, but before she could respond, Mr. Calder intervened. "Seemed to me like Rowan didn't have much choice after Cole Danner started manhandling his wife. Can't blame a man for setting things straight when someone's disrespecting what's his." The words "what's his" sent a strange thrill through Lila's chest, even though she knew they were part of the performance. Mrs. Whitcomb sniffed. "Yes, well, I suppose Mr. Hale is protective, though one does wonder about a man who lives alone in the mountains like some kind of hermit. What do we really know about him?" "Enough," Mr. Calder said firmly. "Now, was there anything else?" After Mrs. Whitcomb left, with her thread and her disapproval, Mr. Calder turned to Lila. For a long moment, he simply studied her with his calm, assessing gaze. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said finally, "but I'll ask anyway. Are you in some kind of trouble, girl?" Lila's throat tightened. "No, I'm not in trouble." "Is he a good man? This Rowan Hale?" "I think so, yes." Mr. Calder nodded slowly. "I've seen him in here a few times over the years. Always paid fair, never caused problems. Keeps to himself mostly, but there's keeping to yourself and there's hiding from something. He strikes me as the former." He paused. "What I'm asking is, do you feel safe with him?" The question caught Lila off guard. No one had ever asked her if she felt safe before. Safety had never been part of the equation of her life. "Yes," she said, and realized she meant it. "I feel safe with him." "Good. Then that's enough for me." Mr. Calder returned to his ledger. "You'll be getting questions all day, I expect, probably all week. My advice? Keep your answers short and your story straight. Don't offer more than you're asked. And remember, you've got just as much right to privacy as anyone else in this town." "Mr. Calder?" Lila waited until he looked up. "Thank you for what you said last night. You didn't have to lie for me." "Who says I lied?" The corner of his mouth quirked up. "Maybe I did stand witness. Maybe I just forgot to mention it to anyone until it became relevant." It wasn't true, and they both knew it, but Lila felt a surge of gratitude so strong it brought tears to her eyes. "Still, thank you." The day that followed was exactly as Mr. Calder had predicted. A parade of customers who suddenly needed to purchase items they'd managed without for months, all of them burning with curiosity about Lila's mysterious husband. Some were kind, like Sarah Bentley, who came in genuinely happy for her. Others were coldly calculating, like Mary Thornton, who examined Lila's ring with suspicious eyes as if checking whether the gold might be painted brass. "It's quite plain, isn't it?" Mary observed. "I suppose mountain men don't have access to the finer jewelers." "My husband made it himself," Lila replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I prefer it to anything store-bought." By noon, her prepared answers had become automatic. Yes, they'd been courting privately. No, she hadn't told anyone because they'd wanted to keep it between themselves. Yes, he lived in the high country, a day's ride north into the mountains. No, she didn't know exactly when she'd be joining him there. They were still making arrangements. That last part was improvisation, born from Mrs. Patterson's pointed question about when Lila would be leaving her position at the mercantile. The idea that she might actually leave Cedar Falls hadn't fully occurred to Lila until that moment, but once spoken, it settled into her mind with surprising weight. She could leave. That was part of what Rowan had offered, wasn't it? Not just protection from the town's cruelty, but escape from it entirely. The thought followed her through the afternoon as she restocked shelves and measured out flour and listened to the endless speculation swirling around her like autumn leaves in a wind. By the time Mr. Calder locked the door at 6 o'clock, Lila felt wrung out and hollow. "Go on upstairs," Mr. Calder told her. "You've earned your rest. And Lila, you did good today. Held your head high." In her room, Lila collapsed onto her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. The ring felt heavy on her finger. Not the physical weight of the gold, but the weight of what it represented. A fiction that was rapidly becoming real in the minds of everyone who saw it. 4 weeks. She had 4 weeks to decide whether to continue this charade or end it gracefully. 4 weeks to determine if she could live with being Mrs. Rowan Hale, even if the marriage was nothing but a shield against the world's cruelty. The days that followed developed their own strange rhythm. Lila went to work, fielded questions, and wore her ring like armor. And something remarkable began to happen. People's behavior toward her shifted in subtle but unmistakable ways. Cole Danner crossed to the other side of the street when he saw her coming. The women who'd once whispered and giggled now offered careful nods of greeting. Even Mrs. Whitcomb, for all her suspicion, couldn't quite bring herself to be openly cruel to a married woman. Marriage had transformed Lila from an acceptable target into someone worthy of at least minimal respect. It was a bitter pill to swallow, that a gold ring and a man's name could accomplish what 23 years of her own existence hadn't, but Lila swallowed it nonetheless. Sarah Bentley became a frequent visitor to the mercantile, her genuine warmth a balm against the other's calculated politeness. A week after the harvest dance, she invited Lila to join the church quilting circle. "I know you've never come before," Sarah said, touching Lila's arm gently, "but that's different now. You're a married woman. You belong with us." Lila wanted to laugh at the absurdity, that her belonging was contingent on a lie, but she found herself accepting anyway. What else was there to do? Refuse and confirm everyone's suspicions that something was wrong with her marriage? Or accept and step into this new role she'd been handed, however fraudulent its foundation? She chose acceptance. And so, on a gray Tuesday afternoon, Lila found herself seated in Reverend Mitchell's parlor surrounded by the respectable married women of Cedar Falls, a square of fabric in her lap and a needle in her hand. "Your stitches are lovely," Mrs. Patterson observed, examining Lila's work with surprise. "So even and small. However did you learn?" "My mother taught me," Lila replied, "before she died." There was a murmur of sympathy around the circle. These women had known about Lila's mother. Everyone in Cedar Falls knew everything about everyone, but they'd never expressed sympathy before. Orphan Lila, fat Lila, pathetic Lila hadn't warranted their concern. But Mrs. Rowan Hale, with her neat stitches and her mysterious husband, somehow did. "It must be lonely," Sarah ventured, "with your husband up in the mountains so much of the time." All eyes turned to Lila. Here was the question beneath all questions. How could a marriage be real if the husband was never present? "I miss him," Lila said carefully, "but I understand his work. The high country isn't kind to those who don't tend it properly, and he comes to town when he can." "Will you join him eventually?" This from Mrs. Edwards, the blacksmith's wife, her tone genuinely curious rather than accusatory. "That's the plan," Lila heard herself say. "We're just making sure everything's ready. A cabin built for one needs modifications for two." The lie came so easily it frightened her, but the women nodded, accepting this explanation as reasonable. Of course, a man would need to prepare his home before bringing a wife to it. Of course, there would be a transition period. "You're braver than I could be," Sarah said with feeling. "Living up there so far from town, from neighbors. Doesn't it frighten you?" "Did it?" Lila considered the question honestly. A month ago, the idea would have terrified her, leaving the only home she'd ever known for an isolated cabin with a stranger. But now, after weeks of living as Mrs. Rowan Hale, after experiencing the peculiar power of being claimed and protected, the prospect held less fear than she would have expected. "I think," Lila said slowly, "that being lonely in a place where you're wanted is better than being lonely in a place where you're not." The words fell into a sudden silence. Several women looked down at their work, and Lila wondered if she'd said too much, revealed too much of the truth beneath the fiction. But Sarah reached over and squeezed her hand. "That's beautifully put," she said softly. "And very true." The afternoon passed, and Lila found herself relaxing into the gentle rhythm of needlework and conversation. These women weren't her friends, not yet, perhaps not ever, but they were no longer her tormentors either. The ring on her finger had purchased this much at least: a reprieve from active cruelty, a tentative inclusion in the ordinary rhythms of town life. As October deepened and the first Thursday of November approached, Lila found herself thinking more and more about Rowan Hale, about what he'd done for her and why, about the photograph of his lost wife and daughter, the way his scarred hands had been gentle when he slid the ring onto her finger, the quiet authority in his voice when he'd faced down Cole Danner, about the choice that was coming, whether to keep wearing the ring or to hand it back with gratitude for one kind night. 3 days before Rowan was due to return, Lila walked out to the cottonwood tree where they'd crafted their story. The leaves had turned gold and were falling now, carpeting the ground in dying light. She stood beneath the branches and tried to imagine what it would be like to tell him yes, she wanted to continue. Or worse, to tell him no, and watch him ride back into the mountains alone, taking with him this strange new version of herself that had emerged in his absence. "Talking to trees now?" Lila spun around to find Mr. Calder approaching, a package under his arm. "Just thinking," she said. Dangerous habit, thinking, but his eyes were kind. "He'll be here Thursday." "I know." Mr. Calder studied her for a long moment. "You planning to be wearing that ring when he arrives?" Lila looked down at her left hand. The band had developed a warm patina over the weeks, molding itself to her finger as if it belonged there. "I don't know," she admitted. "Is that foolish? To even consider making this permanent?" "Depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for romance and passion, might be foolish. But if you're looking for partnership and respect, for a man who'll treat you decent and stand between you and the world's cruelty?" He shrugged. "Seems to me you could do a lot worse." "I barely know him." "True enough. But you know how he behaved when it mattered. You know he put himself between you and harm without asking anything in return. That tells you something about a man's character, doesn't it?" Lila thought about this as she walked back to town. What did she know about Rowan Hale? That he'd lost everything, that he carried grief like a stone in his chest, that he'd looked at a stranger being humiliated and decided to do something about it, even though it would have been easier to walk away, that he danced with her like she mattered. Was that enough foundation to build a life on? Thursday morning arrived cold and clear. Lila woke before dawn, her stomach a knot of nerves. She dressed with extra care, not the blue calico from the dance, but her second-best dress, a deep green that brought out what little color there was in her complexion. She braided her hair and pinned it up, then stared at her reflection for a long moment. The ring glinted on her finger. She still hadn't decided. Downstairs, Mr. Calder was already opening the store. He took one look at Lila and smiled. "He'll be here by noon, I'd wager." Always was punctual, that one. Lila tried to focus on work, inventorying stock, helping the few early customers, but her attention kept drifting to the window, to the road that led north into the mountains. What would she say when she saw him? How would this conversation even begin? At 11:30, she heard it, the sound of a horse's hooves on the packed dirt street. Her heart lurched into her throat. "That'll be him," Mr. Calder said calmly, as if mysterious mountain men arrived to collect their fake wives every day. Lila moved to the window and saw Rowan dismounting from a sturdy bay gelding. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall and weathered, dressed in buckskin and wool, his scarred face partially hidden by his beard. He tied the horse to the rail outside the store and stood for a moment, his pale eyes scanning the street with the wariness of someone accustomed to watching for danger. Then he saw her through the window, and something in his expression shifted, softened. He came through the door, bringing the smell of pine and wood smoke with him. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other. "Mrs. Hale," he said quietly. "Mr. Hale?" "Rowan," Mr. Calder interrupted, extending his hand. "Good to see you. You'll be needing supplies, I expect." "I will, but first—" Rowan's eyes hadn't left Lila's face. "Might I speak with my wife? Privately?" The word wife still sent that strange thrill through her. Mr. Calder nodded and tactfully retreated to the back room. Alone in the store's front area, Lila and Rowan faced each other across the counter. He looked tired, she noticed. Thinner than he'd been a month ago, with new lines around his eyes. "You kept it on," he said, nodding at her left hand. Lila glanced down at the ring. "I did." "Any particular reason?" She could have given him easy answers, that it was convenient, that it kept Cole Danner at bay, that she hadn't had time to properly consider the alternatives. Instead, she found herself telling him the truth. "Because for the first time in my life, people treat me like I matter, like I deserve basic human respect." She met his eyes. "Because you gave me that gift, and I wasn't ready to give it back." Rowan was quiet for a moment, then he said, "That's not a gift I gave you. That's something you always deserved. The ring just made people see it." "Maybe, but they didn't see it before. They're failing, not yours." The words settled into Lila's chest, warm and unexpected. "How have you been?" she asked. "Up in the mountains?" "Cold, quiet. Been getting the cabin ready for winter." He paused. "Been thinking." "About?" "About what happens next. With this," he gestured between them. "I told you 4 weeks to decide, but I realize I never asked what you wanted beyond that. If you want to keep going, what does that look like? Do I just keep coming to town, playing the occasional husband? Do you stay here while I stay there? Or—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "Or?" Lila prompted. "Or does this become real? Not just the ring and the title, but the life that goes with it." Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. "You mean—" "I mean you come up to the cabin. Live there. Be my wife in truth, not just in name." He held up a hand before she could respond. "Before you answer, you need to understand what you'd be getting into. It's not an easy life, Lila. The cabin's small, 1 room, though I could build a partition for privacy. Winters are brutal, snowed in for months sometimes. Nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. No church, no quilting circles, no mercantile down the street, just mountains and sky and silence." "And you," Lila said softly, "and me." Rowan's expression was difficult to read. "Which might not be much comfort. I'm not an easy man. I've got ghosts that don't rest quiet. I don't talk much. I don't—" He paused. "I can offer you partnership, respect, protection, a warm house and food on the table. But I can't offer you romance, can't offer you love. That part of me died with Sarah and Emma." The honesty of it was almost brutal. No false promises, no pretty lies, just the stark truth of what he could and couldn't give. "What would you expect from me?" Lila asked. "As a wife?" "Companionship. Someone to share the work, cooking, mending, helping with the stock when needed. Someone to talk to on the long winter nights, though I won't hold it against you if you'd rather read than listen to me." He met her eyes. "And honesty. Always. If you're unhappy, you say so. If you want to leave, you tell me. No pretending." "No pretending," Lila repeated. "That's ironic, considering how this started." A smile ghosted across Rowan's face. "Fair point, but I'm done pretending. Life's too short and I'm too old for games." The smile faded. "I'm offering you a real marriage, Lila. Maybe not the kind you dreamed about as a girl, but real nonetheless. The question is whether that's something you want." Lila looked around the mercantile, at the familiar shelves, the worn floorboards, the window that looked out onto the street where she'd walked for 23 years. She thought about her small room upstairs, about the quilting circle where she was tolerated but not truly welcomed, about a lifetime of being the woman Cedar Falls pitied and mocked. Then she thought about the mountains, about a cabin she'd never seen, and a life she couldn't quite imagine, About mornings breathing cold air that had never known the taste of cruelty, about nights sitting by a fire with a man who treated her with steady, unwavering respect, about being lonely in a place where she was wanted instead of lonely in a place where she wasn't. "I want to see it," she said. "The cabin, your life up there, before I decide." Rowan nodded slowly. "That's reasonable. When?" "Now." The word came out before Lila had fully thought it through, but once spoken, she knew it was right. "Today. You came for supplies. Get them, and I'll come back with you, just for a few days. I'll tell Mr. Calder I need time away, and you can show me what I'd be agreeing to. It's a day's ride, hard riding, and the weather could turn. Then we'd better leave soon." For a long moment, Rowan simply studied her, as if trying to read the truth written in her face. Then he nodded. "All right. Get what you need. We leave in an hour." Leela's hand shook as she climbed the stairs to her room, the enormity of what she'd just agreed to settling over her like a weight. A day's ride into the mountains with a man she barely knew, to a place she'd never seen, to make a decision that would alter the entire course of her life. It was madness. It was reckless. It was exactly what she needed to do. She pulled her worn travel bag from beneath the bed and began packing with methodical precision. 2 changes of clothes, her nightgown, her hairbrush, the small Bible her mother had given her. Her hands hesitated over the blue calico dress from the harvest dance, then carefully folded it into the bag. Whatever happened in the next few days, she wanted to remember the night everything had changed. Downstairs, she found Mr. Calder helping Rowan load supplies onto a sturdy pack mule. The older man looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. "So you're going," he said. Not a question. "Just for a few days. To understand what I'd be choosing." Mr. Calder set down the sack of flour he'd been holding and turned to face her fully. "You've been a good worker, Lila. Steady and honest. If this doesn't work out, you've got a place here. Remember that." The kindness in his voice made Lila's throat tighten. "Thank you, Mr. Calder. For everything. For lying for me that first night, for—" "I told you," he interrupted gently. "I didn't lie. I just confirmed what needed confirming." He glanced at Rowan, who was tactfully checking the mule's harness. "But if I had lied, it would have been worth it to see you hold your head up for once." Lila impulsively hugged him, something she'd never dared to do in 7 years of working for him. He patted her back awkwardly, then stepped away, clearing his throat. "Go on then, daylight's burning." Rowan had brought a second horse, a gentle-looking mare with kind eyes. He helped Lila mount with the same quiet competence he seemed to bring to everything, his hand steady on her waist as he lifted her into the saddle. "She's called Daisy," he said. "Steady as they come. Just give her her head, and she'll follow my gelding." They rode out of Cedar Falls just past noon, the autumn sun bright but lacking warmth. Lila looked back once as they passed the last buildings, saw Mrs. Whitcomb standing in her doorway with her arms crossed and her face pinched with disapproval. Then they rounded a bend, and the town disappeared behind them, swallowed by the rolling prairie that stretched toward the mountains. For the first hour, they rode in silence. Lila had expected awkwardness, but instead found the quiet companionable. Rowan rode ahead on his bay gelding, the pack mule trailing behind him on a lead rope, while Lila followed on Daisy. The rhythm of the horse's gait was soothing, and the vast openness of the landscape made something in Lila's chest expand and loosen. She'd lived her entire life within a 5-block radius, she realized. The world had been the size of Cedar Falls, bounded by Main Street and the church and the mercantile. But out here, the world was enormous, endless sky meeting endless earth, broken only by the dark line of mountains rising in the distance. "You ride well," Rowan called back to her as they crossed a shallow creek. "Didn't know if you'd had much experience." "Some," Lila replied. "When I was younger, before—" She stopped, not wanting to finish the sentence, but Rowan seemed to understand anyway. "Before people decided you didn't belong on a horse, before they made you feel like you were too much, took up too much space." The accuracy of it stole Lila's breath. "Yes." "World's got enough space for all of us," Rowan said. "Plenty of room for women built strong and solid, same as there's room for women built small and delicate. Anybody who tells you different is selling something." They rode on, climbing gradually as the prairie gave way to foothills. The air grew colder, sharper, scented with pine and stone. Lila watched Rowan's broad back swaying with his horse's movement and thought about what he'd said. Not flattery, not empty comfort, just plain statement of fact delivered in that level voice of his. By late afternoon, they'd entered the mountains proper. The trail narrowed, winding between towering pines and massive boulders that looked like they'd been there since the world was born. A hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing off the stone faces. Lila had never been this far from town, never seen country this wild and untamed. "We'll stop soon," Rowan said, glancing up at the sky where clouds were beginning to gather. "There's a shelter I use about an hour ahead. We'll spend the night there, push on to the cabin tomorrow." "A shelter?" Lila asked, trying to keep the nervousness from her voice. "Just a lean-to. 3 walls and a roof. Built it years back for exactly this purpose, halfway point between town and home." He looked back at her, his expression serious. "I'll sleep outside by the fire. You'll have privacy." The fact that he'd anticipated her concern, addressed it without her having to ask, made something in Lila relax. "All right." The shelter, when they reached it, was exactly as Rowan had described. A simple structure built against a rock face, stocked with firewood and basic supplies. While Rowan tended to the horses and mule, Lila explored the small space. A bedroll lay neatly folded in one corner, along with a few cooking implements and a small store of dried food. "I keep it stocked," Rowan explained, appearing in the entrance with an armload of wood. "Never know when weather might force you to hole up for a day or two." He built the fire with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything else. Precise movements, no wasted effort. Soon flames were crackling cheerfully, pushing back the gathering dusk. Lila helped him prepare a simple meal of beans and cornbread, working side by side in a silence that felt increasingly natural. As they ate, sitting on opposite sides of the fire, Rowan finally broke the quiet. "You got questions, I expect, about what life's like up here, what I'd expect from you. Now's the time to ask." Lila considered this, watching firelight flicker across his scarred face. "You said you could offer partnership and respect, but not love. I understand that. You lost your wife and daughter, and that kind of grief doesn't just disappear. But what about—" She hesitated, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "What about other aspects of marriage?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "You're asking if I'd expect you in my bed." "Yes. That would be your choice. I won't force you or pressure you. If you want a marriage that's partnership only, that's what we'll have. If you want more, eventually, when trust's been built—" He shrugged. "I'm not a young man, Lila, but I'm not dead either. I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't welcome that kind of closeness, given time. But it would have to be something you wanted, not something you gave because you thought I expected it." The honesty was almost overwhelming. Lila had grown up hearing whispered stories about marital duties, about what husbands demanded and wives endured. But Rowan was offering her choice, autonomy over her own body, even within the bounds of marriage. "How old are you?" she asked. "You said you're not young, but—" 43, 20 years older than you, give or take. Old enough to be your father, almost." "My father was a drunk who couldn't face his own shame," Lila said quietly. "You're nothing like him." Rowan's expression softened. "Thank you for that. But the age difference is real, and you should think on it. I'll be an old man when you're still in your prime. Might be you'll regret tying yourself to someone so much older. And might be I won't." Lila pulled her shawl tighter against the cold. "What happened to your face? The scars?" She half expected him to refuse to answer, but he simply touched the long scar that ran from temple to jaw. "Bear, about 12 years back. She had cubs. I got between them accidentally. My own fault for not paying attention. She could have killed me, probably should have, but I managed to get a shot off that scared her away long enough for me to get out of there." "That must have been terrifying." "It was, but it taught me a valuable lesson about respecting the mountain and what lives on it. This isn't our land, not really. We're just borrowing space from creatures who've been here longer than us." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Sarah hated the scars, not because they were ugly, but because they reminded her I could have died, left her and Emma alone." "Tell me about them," Lila said softly. Your wife and daughter, if you want to." Rowan was silent for so long that Lila thought he wouldn't answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and measured, staring into the flames as if seeing the past written there. "Sarah was a town girl like you. Met her in Cedar Falls when I came down for supplies one spring. She was working in the hotel restaurant, and I swear I fell in love with her the moment I saw her smile. Took me 3 months of visiting before I worked up the courage to court her proper, another 6 before I convinced her to marry me and come up to the cabin." He smiled slightly at the memory. "She was scared, first time she saw it. Said it looked like a place where hope went to die. But she stayed anyway, made it into a home, made it beautiful." "And Emma?" "Came along 2 years later. Difficult birth, nearly lost them both. After that, Sarah couldn't have more children, but Emma was enough. More than enough." His voice roughened. "She was sunshine in a bottle, that girl. Talked from dawn to dusk, asked more questions than any child had a right to. And she was built sturdy, like her mother, strong. I was so proud of that, thought it meant she'd survive anything this hard world threw at her." "What happened to her?" Lila asked gently. "You said people were cruel." "Town boys. Summer of her 17th year, I took her down to Cedar Falls for the Independence Day celebration. She wanted to dance, wanted to be part of the festivities. I was selling furs, wasn't paying close enough attention." He paused, his jaw tight. "They made sport of her, called her names, told her no man would ever want her. One of them, Cole Danner's older brother actually, said she was so fat she'd crush any man who tried to lie with her." Lila felt her stomach turn. "Oh, God." She ran off crying. "By the time I found her, she'd made it to the edge of town, to the old mill by the creek. Sarah and we tried to comfort her, told her those boys were fools who didn't know what they were talking about. But the damage was done. She believed them, you see. Believed she was worthless, unlovable, a burden on the world." Rowan's voice had gone flat, emotionless in the way of someone reciting facts too painful to feel. 2 weeks later, she walked into the creek wearing her Sunday dress with rocks in her pockets. Sarah found her just after dawn. "Rowan," Lila breathed, horror and grief swelling in her chest. "Sarah lasted 6 months after that. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't find a reason to keep living in a world that had been so cruel to her baby girl. Doctor called it pneumonia when she passed, but I knew better. She died of a broken heart and a broken spirit." He finally looked up from the fire, met Lila's eyes. "So when I saw Cole Danner grabbing you, when I heard him and his friends making sport of you the same way his brother and his friends made sport of Emma, I just couldn't stand by and let it happen again." Tears were streaming down Lila's face now, hot and fast. "I'm so sorry. I'm so terribly sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just understand why I'm doing this. You're not a replacement for Emma. You're your own person, with your own worth. But maybe if I can give you the protection and respect I failed to give her, maybe that means her death wasn't entirely meaningless. Maybe it means I learned something from failing her." Lila stood and moved around the fire to sit beside him. Without thinking, she took his scarred hand in both of hers. It was rougher even than she'd expected, marked by years of hard labor and harder living. "You didn't fail her," she said fiercely. "Those boys failed her. This whole cruel world failed her. But you loved her and tried to protect her, and that matters." "Does it? She's still dead." "Yes, and that's a tragedy. But you're still alive and so am I, and maybe—" Lila's voice shook. "Maybe we can build something good out of all this sadness. Not to replace what you lost, but to honor it. To prove that cruelty doesn't always win, that kind people can still find each other and make a life worth living." Rowan turned his hand over, clasping hers gently. "You're a wise woman, Lila Hart." "Hale," she corrected softly. "Lila Hale. Even if it's only pretend, even if it's only for now, that's who I am when I'm with you." They sat in silence after that, hands clasped, watching the fire burn down to embers. Eventually Rowan stood, released her hand with obvious reluctance. "You should sleep," he said. "We've got hard riding tomorrow. I'll be right outside if you need anything." Lila nodded and retreated into the shelter. She wrapped herself in the bedroll Rowan had provided, but sleep was slow to come. Through the open front of the lean-to, she could see him sitting by the fire, a dark silhouette against the flames, keeping watch, keeping her safe. She thought about Emma, about a girl who'd looked like her and died believing she was worthless. Thought about Sarah, who'd loved her daughter so much that living without her had become impossible. Thought about Rowan, carrying that double loss like stones on his shoulders for 10 long years. And she thought about herself, about Lila Hart, who'd spent 23 years believing the world's judgment of her, who'd accepted cruelty as her natural portion, who'd never imagined she might deserve better. But maybe she did deserve better. Maybe Rowan was right, that the world had enough space for all kinds of people, and that being strong and solid was just as worthy as being small and delicate. Maybe partnership and respect were worth more than romance and passion. Maybe a marriage built on honesty and mutual protection could be just as real as one built on love. When sleep finally came, Lila dreamed of mountains and a cabin she'd never seen, of a life she was still deciding whether to choose. They woke to frost on the ground and their breath steaming in the cold morning air. Rowan had coffee boiling over a rebuilt fire, and he handed Lila a cup without comment on the dark circles under her eyes. If he'd guessed she'd spent half the night thinking, he was kind enough not to mention it. They rode hard through the morning, climbing steadily higher into terrain that grew increasingly rugged and beautiful. Pine forests gave way to rocky outcroppings, and twice they passed waterfalls that thundered down cliffsides and cascades of white water. Lila had never imagined the world could be so vast, so wild, so utterly indifferent to human concerns. "Another hour," Rowan called back to her around midday. "We're almost there." Lila's heart began to pound with a mixture of anticipation and dread. This was it. The moment of truth when she would see the place Rowan was offering her, the life he'd described in such stark terms. One room, brutal winters, isolation from everything and everyone she'd ever known. But also, mornings without cruelty, evenings without mockery, days spent with a man who looked at her and saw a person worthy of respect. The cabin appeared suddenly as they rounded a bend in the trail, a solid structure built of logs and stone, nestled in a clearing with mountains rising behind it and a creek running nearby. Smoke rose from the chimney, which confused Lila until she realized Rowan must have left the fire banked before he left. "It's bigger than I expected," she said as they dismounted. "Had to be, for 3 people. Now it's just me, but I never saw the point in making it smaller." He tied the horses and led her to the door. "Welcome to my home. Our home, maybe, if you decide you want it to be." He pushed open the door, and Lila stepped inside. The interior was dim, lit by coals glowing in a large stone fireplace that took up most of one wall. As her eyes adjusted, she took in rough-hewn furniture that looked handmade but sturdy, shelves lined with books, a sleeping area in one corner partitioned off with a curtain, a small kitchen area with a cast-iron stove. The cabin was simple but not crude, showing signs of care and attention to detail. Lila searched for the right word. "It's more than I expected." Rowan moved to the fireplace and began building up the fire. "Sarah couldn't stand dirt or disorder, taught me to keep things clean, keep things organized. Habit stuck even after she was gone." He gestured around the space. "That's her rocking chair in the corner, her quilt on the bed. I couldn't bring myself to get rid of them." Lila walked over to examine the quilt, intricate stitching in a pattern of interlocking rings. "It's beautiful. She was talented." "She was." Rowan straightened from the fire. "I know it might seem strange keeping her things. If it bothers you—" "It doesn't," Lila said quickly. "They're part of your history, part of what made you who you are. I wouldn't ask you to erase that." Something in Rowan's expression eased. "Thank you. Some women might not be so understanding." "I'm not some women." "No," he agreed quietly. "You're not." He showed her around the property over the next hour. The small barn where he kept 2 milk cows and a handful of chickens, the root cellar stocked with preserves and vegetables, the workshop where he did his carpentry and metalwork. Everything was neat, organized, showing the same attention to detail as the cabin itself. "You're self-sufficient up here," Lila observed. "Have to be. Town's a day away, and in winter it might as well be on the moon. Everything you need you either have or make or do without." He paused. "It's a hard life, Leela. I won't pretend otherwise. But it's honest. And it's free from the kind of poison you get in towns sometimes, where people have nothing better to do than judge and criticize each other. They ate a simple lunch, bread and cheese and dried apples, sitting at the rough-hewn table. Then Rowan made an excuse about checking the livestock and left Lila alone in the cabin to think. She wandered the space slowly, running her fingers over Sarah's rocking chair, examining the books on the shelves, volumes of poetry and philosophy, alongside practical manuals on farming and animal husbandry. She looked out the window at the mountains rising vast and eternal against the sky, listened to the creek's constant murmur and the wind sighing through the pines. It was beautiful. It was isolated. It was nothing like the life she'd known. And standing there in Rowan's cabin, thousands of feet above Cedar Falls, and the only world she'd ever known, Lila realized something that took her breath away. She wanted this. Not despite its hardships, but perhaps because of them. Because here, in this remote place where the work was hard and the winters brutal, she would be valued for her strength instead of mocked for it. She would be a partner, a helpmeet, someone whose labor mattered and whose presence was wanted. She touched the ring on her finger, felt its familiar weight. When Rowan returned an hour later, stamping snow from his boots, snow that had begun falling while Lila was lost in thought, he found her sitting in Sarah's rocking chair, a book open in her lap, but her eyes fixed on the fire. "Snow's coming in earnest," he said. "We might be here a few days before it's safe to ride back down." "Good," Lila said. She closed the book and looked up at him. "I want to stay. Not just for a few days. I want to make this real." Or Rowan went very still. "You're sure? You haven't even been here a full day. Haven't seen what winter's like, how isolated it gets." "I've been isolated my whole life," Lila interrupted. "At least here I'd be isolated with someone who actually wants me around." She stood and moved toward him. "You asked what I'm looking for back in town. I'm looking for a place where I'm not the town joke, where my body doesn't define my worth, where I can work hard and be valued for it. I'm looking for partnership with someone who treats me with respect, and you're offering me all of that. I'm offering you hard labor and hard winters, and a man with more ghosts than future. I'll take it." She held out her left hand, the ring gleaming in the firelight. "I'll take all of it if you'll have me." Rowan reached out slowly and took her hand, his thumb brushing over the ring he'd made. "Then I guess we'd better make this official. Proper marriage, not just pretend. When the snow clears, we'll ride back to Cedar Falls, get Reverend Mitchell to do it right, and then I come back here," Lila finished. "As your wife. Your real wife." "My real wife," Rowan echoed, and for the first time since she'd met him, Lila saw something like hope flicker in his winter sky eyes. The snow fell for 3 days straight, transforming the mountain into a hushed world of white. Lila and Rowan settled into an unexpected rhythm during those isolated days, working side by side to tend the animals, cook meals, and keep the fire burning. They talked more than Lila had talked to anyone in years, their conversations ranging from the practical matters of mountain living to deeper discussions of books, beliefs, and the shape their shared life might take. On the 4th morning, Lila woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through the cabin's small windows. Rowan was already up, standing at the door and looking out at a world glittering with fresh snow. "It's cleared," he said when he noticed she was awake. "We can head down today if you still want to do this." Lila sat up, pulling Sarah's quilt around her shoulders. She'd been sleeping in the partitioned area while Rowan took the floor by the fire, and the arrangement had felt both strange and comfortable. Married, but not. Together, but separate, testing the boundaries of what they were becoming to each other. "I want to do this," she said firmly. They made the journey back to Cedar Falls in a single long day, pushing hard to make it before nightfall. Lila felt the weight of decision settling over her with each mile they descended. This wasn't pretend anymore, wasn't a temporary shield against cruelty. This was a choice to alter her life permanently, to become someone entirely new. Or perhaps, she thought as Daisy picked her way carefully down the snowy trail, not someone new, but someone she'd always had the potential to be if the world had given her the chance. They arrived in Cedar Falls just as dusk was falling, leading their horses down Main Street under the curious stares of townspeople. Rowan took them directly to the church, where lamplight showed through the windows of the Reverend's adjacent house. Reverend Mitchell opened his door with obvious surprise. "Mr. Hale, and Lila, Mrs. Hale, I should say, what brings you out in this weather?" "We need to talk to you about our marriage," Rowan said without preamble. May we come in? Inside the Reverend's warm parlor, with his wife serving them coffee and hovering with unconcealed curiosity, Rowan laid out the truth with the same stark honesty he'd shown Lila from the beginning. Our marriage wasn't legal, he said, his voice level. We told people we'd wed, and Amos Calder backed our story, but there was no ceremony, no vows before God or witnesses. It was a fiction we created to protect Lila from harassment. Mrs. Mitchell gasped, but the Reverend held up a hand for silence. Go on. But we want to make it real now. Lila's agreed to come live with me at my cabin, to be my wife in truth. We need you to perform a proper ceremony. Reverend Mitchell was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful. He was an old man who'd ministered to Cedar Falls for 30 years and seen just about everything human nature had to offer. You deceived this community, he said finally, lied to us all. Yes, Rowan agreed without flinching. Why? What purpose did it serve? Before Rowan could answer, Lila spoke up. Because I was being humiliated at the harvest dance and he stepped in to stop it. Because a woman with a husband is treated with respect while a woman alone is treated like something less than human. Because he gave me dignity when no one else would. The Reverend's eyes moved to her, sharp and assessing. And now you want to compound one deception with a real marriage? Lila, do you understand what you're agreeing to? This man is a stranger to you. He's been kinder to me in 6 weeks than this town has been in 23 years, Lila replied quietly. And yes, I understand. I've seen his home, his life. I know what I'm choosing. You're choosing isolation, hardship, a man 20 years your senior who you barely know. I'm choosing partnership and respect, Lila said. I'm choosing a life where I'm valued instead of mocked. That's more than I ever thought I'd have. Mrs. Mitchell, who'd been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. Harold, you remember how Cole Danner treated her at that dance. Half the town saw it. If Mr. Hale hadn't intervened, Lord knows what might have happened. And I've watched her these past weeks. She holds her head higher now. She smiles. Whatever this arrangement is, it's been good for her. The Reverend sighed heavily. I don't like deception. It goes against everything I stand for. Neither do I, Rowan said, which is why we're here asking you to make it right, to sanctify what started as a lie and turn it into truth. Another long silence. Then Reverend Mitchell stood and walked to his bookshelf, pulling down the heavy church register. Very well. I'll perform the ceremony. But I want both of you to understand, marriage is a sacred covenant before God. It's not something to enter into lightly, and it's not something to dissolve when it becomes difficult. If I marry you, you're bound to each other for life. Is that clear? Crystal clear, Rowan said. Lila? I understand. Then we'll do it tomorrow, noon in the church. I'll need witnesses. I'll stand witness, came a voice from the doorway. Amos Calder stood there, snow dusting his shoulders. He must have seen them ride in and followed. Already lied for them once. Might as well see it through proper. Reverend Mitchell shook his head, but there was a hint of a smile on his face. You're all going to send me to an early grave. Fine. Tomorrow at noon. And Lila, you'll need a dress more suitable than traveling clothes. Mrs. Mitchell, can you help with that? The Reverend's wife brightened immediately. Oh yes, I have my daughter's wedding dress in storage. It should fit with a few quick alterations. Come, dear, let's get you measured. Lila found herself swept into the Reverend's back room, stripped to her chemise and measured with brisk efficiency by a woman who chattered nonstop about weddings and preparations. When Mrs. Mitchell finally released her, Lila felt dizzy with the sudden reality of it all. This was happening. Tomorrow she would stand in the church and marry Rowan Hale for real, with vows and witnesses and the blessing of God. Tomorrow she would stop being Lila Hart and become Lila Hale in truth. That night, she stayed in her old room above the mercantile one last time. Mr. Calder had welcomed her back without questions, simply nodding when she explained she'd be leaving for good after the wedding. You'll be missed, he said gruffly, but I think you're making the right choice. That man, he looks at you like you matter. That's worth more than all the romance in the world. Alone in her small room, Lila packed her few possessions. It didn't take long. She'd never owned much. A few dresses, some books, her mother's Bible, the blue calico from the harvest dance. Her entire life fit into 2 small bags. She tried to sleep but couldn't, her mind racing with thoughts of tomorrow and all the tomorrows that would follow. Finally, she lit her lamp and pulled out her mother's Bible, letting it fall open at random. The page showed Ruth's words to Naomi. "Whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God." Lila traced the words with her finger, feeling their weight. Ruth had chosen to follow Naomi into uncertainty, leaving everything familiar behind for the promise of something better. Was that not what Lila was doing? Choosing to follow Rowan into the mountains, into a life she couldn't fully imagine, trusting that it would be better than what she was leaving behind? The next morning dawned clear and cold. Mrs. Mitchell arrived early with the wedding dress, simple white muslin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. It fit Lila surprisingly well, though she felt strange and exposed in the pale fabric. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Mitchell said, arranging Lila's hair into a soft bun, like a proper bride. Lila studied herself in the small mirror and hardly recognized the woman looking back. Not beautiful, she'd never be that, no matter what dress she wore, but different somehow, transformed by expectation and hope. At 1:45, Sarah Bentley arrived with a small bouquet of dried flowers. "I heard what you're doing," she said, embracing Lila warmly. "The whole town's heard. Some are scandalized, of course, but others, well, we understand. We're happy for you." "Thank you," Lila managed, her throat tight. They walked to the church together, Sarah on one side and Mrs. Mitchell on the other, like guards escorting her to some momentous fate. The church bells were ringing, calling witnesses to the ceremony. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. Inside, the church was half full. More people than Lila had expected. Mr. Calder stood at the front near Reverend Mitchell, his best suit brushed clean, and beside him stood Rowan. Lila had never seen him in anything but buckskin and wool, but today he wore a dark suit that must have been stored away for years. His hair was neatly combed, his beard trimmed. The scars on his face stood out starkly against his clean shirt collar, but his eyes, those winter sky eyes, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. She walked down the aisle alone, her mother's Bible clutched in her hands instead of Sarah's dried flowers. Each step felt monumental, carrying her from one life into another. People whispered as she passed. She heard fragments of "Can you believe?" and "So sudden" and "Poor thing." But for once, the whispers didn't have the power to hurt her. She reached the front and stood beside Rowan. He looked down at her, and the corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. "You look well," he said quietly. "So do you." Reverend Mitchell cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God and these witnesses to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony, which is an honorable estate, instituted by God, signifying unto us the mystical union between Christ and his church." The familiar words washed over Lila like a tide. She'd heard them at other weddings, never imagining she'd stand here herself. Beside her, Rowan stood solid and steady, his presence anchoring her. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly or unadvisedly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. The Reverend paused, looking at them both meaningfully. "Do you both come here freely and without reservation to give yourselves to each other in marriage?" "I do," Rowan said, his voice carrying clearly through the small church. "I do," Lila echoed. "Then let us proceed. Rowan Hale, do you take this woman to be your wedded wife, to live together in the covenant of marriage? Will you love her, comfort her, honor and keep her, in sickness and in health, forsaking all others so long as you both shall live?" "I will." Rowan's eyes never left Lila's face. "Lila Hart, do you take this man to be your wedded husband, to live together in the covenant of marriage? Will you love him, comfort him, honor and keep him, in sickness and in health, forsaking all others so long as you both shall live?" This was it, the final moment to choose. Lila could still say no, could still walk back down that aisle and return to her small room and her small life. No one would force her. Even Rowan would understand, would let her go without bitterness. But she thought of the cabin in the mountains, of the life Rowan was offering, of mornings without cruelty and evenings without mockery. She thought of his scarred hands gentle on hers, his steady presence, his unflinching honesty. She thought of Emma, who hadn't been saved, and of herself, who might yet be. "I will," she said, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff into open air. Reverend Mitchell nodded with satisfaction. "The rings, please." Rowan produced 2 bands, the one Lila already wore, and a second one Lila hadn't seen before. He must have made it during the 3 days of snow, working by firelight in his cabin workshop. "Rowan, place the ring on Lila's finger and repeat after me. With this ring, I thee wed." Rowan took Lila's left hand, she'd removed the ring that morning at Mrs. Mitchell's instruction, and slid the band back onto her finger where it had lived for 6 weeks. "With this ring, I thee wed." "Lila, place the ring on Rowan's finger and repeat, with this ring, I thee wed." Lila took the second band, smaller but matching the first, and slipped it onto Rowan's work-roughened finger. It looked strange there, a circle of gold against calloused skin that had never worn jewelry. "With this ring, I thee wed. By the power vested in me by God in the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Reverend Mitchell's voice softened. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Rowan, you may kiss your bride." Rowan hesitated for just a moment, giving Lila time to pull away if she wanted to. Then he leaned down and kissed her gently, carefully, as if she were something precious that might break. His lips were warm and his beard soft against her skin, and the kiss lasted only a heartbeat before he pulled back. But in that heartbeat, something shifted. This was real now. They were married, truly, legally, irrevocably married. The small congregation erupted in applause. Sarah Bentley was crying openly. Even Mr. Calder looked misty-eyed. Lila and Rowan turned to face the witnesses as husband and wife, and Lila saw Mrs. Whitcomb in the back pew, her expression pinched and disapproving but present nonetheless. They signed the register in Reverend Mitchell's office, Lila Hart writing her name for the last time, Rowan Hale signing beside her with his neat, precise script. Mr. Calder and Mrs. Mitchell signed as witnesses, making it official. "You're married now," the Reverend said. "May God bless your union and give you strength for the road ahead." Outside the church, a small crowd had gathered. Sarah embraced Lila tearfully. "Write to me," she begged. "Let me know how you're doing up there in the mountains." "I will," Lila promised, though she had no idea how mail might reach her in such a remote place. Mr. Calder shook Rowan's hand with surprising force. "You take care of her. She's a good woman, better than this town deserved." "I know," Rowan said simply. They stayed in Cedar Falls only long enough to gather Lila's few possessions and purchase additional supplies for the winter ahead. By mid-afternoon, they were riding north again, leaving the town and all of Lila's former life behind. This time, the journey felt different. Lila was no longer visiting. She was going home. The word felt strange even in her thoughts, but there it was. Home. Not the Mercantile, not Cedar Falls, but a cabin in the mountains with a man who was now her husband. They rode in companionable silence as the miles passed, the horses' hooves crunching through snow that had frozen in the night's cold. When they stopped to rest the animals, Rowan helped Lila down from her saddle with hands that lingered just a moment longer than necessary. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. Lila looked back toward Cedar Falls, hidden now by distance and terrain. Then she looked at Rowan, at his scarred face and steady eyes, at the ring gleaming on his left hand. "No regrets," she said. They reached the cabin as darkness was falling, the windows dark and cold. But Rowan had the fire lit within minutes, and soon warmth was spreading through the space. Lila stood in the center of the room that was now her home and tried to process the magnitude of what she'd done. "You're tired," Rowan observed. "It's been a long day. Why don't you rest? I'll see to the animals and get us some supper." He left her alone, and Lila sank into Sarah's rocking chair. Her rocking chair now, she supposed. Through the window, she could see Rowan moving between the cabin and barn, his silhouette dark against the snow. Her husband. The word still felt foreign, like clothing that didn't quite fit. When he returned with milk and eggs from the barn, Lila had changed out of the wedding dress and into her everyday clothes. They prepared supper together in the small kitchen area, their movements awkward as they learned to share the space. Lila made cornbread while Rowan fried eggs and salt pork, and they ate at the table in a silence that felt heavier than before. Finally, as they were washing the dishes, Rowan spoke. I know this is strange for you. Everything's happened so fast. If you need time to adjust, I understand. There's no rush for anything. Lila understood what he was delicately not saying, that their wedding night didn't have to be a traditional wedding night, that she could continue sleeping behind the partition while he took the floor, that their marriage of partnership didn't have to become anything more. Where will you sleep? She asked. I can make a bedroll by the fire like I did while you were visiting. That seems unfair. It's your home, your bed. It's our home now, our bed, but I won't. He stopped, searching for words. I told you I wouldn't pressure you. I meant that. When you're ready for that kind of closeness, if you're ever ready, you'll let me know. Until then, I'm content to wait. The kindness in his voice made Lila's chest ache. She thought about the stories she'd heard of wedding nights, of husbands who demanded their rights regardless of their wives' willingness. But Rowan was offering her choice, autonomy, time. I'm not ready, she said honestly. Not tonight. Everything's too new, too overwhelming. I need time to understand what we are to each other. That's fair. Take all the time you need. That night, Lila slept behind the partition in the bed that had been Sarah's, while Rowan made himself comfortable by the fire. But before she closed the curtain, she paused. Rowan? Yes? Thank you. For giving me this. For being patient. For everything. In the firelight, his scarred face looked almost peaceful. Thank you for taking a chance on a broken old mountain man with more past than future. You're not broken, Lila said softly. Just scarred. There's a difference. She pulled the curtain closed and lay in the darkness, listening to Rowan move about the cabin as he prepared his bedroll. The sounds were comforting, the crackle of the fire, the rustle of blankets, the solid presence of another person nearby. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Lila fell asleep feeling safe. The days that followed established their life together. Rowan showed Lila the rhythms of mountain living, how to carry water from the creek without spilling, how to bank the fire to last through the night, how to milk the cows and collect eggs and preserve food for the long winter ahead. The work was hard, harder than anything Lila had done at the mercantile, and she fell into bed each night exhausted and aching. But it was good work, honest work, and Rowan never made her feel inadequate when she struggled or failed. He simply showed her again, patiently, until she got it right. And when she did succeed, when she managed to split kindling without nearly taking off her own foot, or when she finally got the hang of the temperamental stove, his quiet, well done, made her glow with pride. They talked more as the weeks passed, sharing meals and evening hours by the fire. Rowan told her about the mountain, about the animals that lived there, and the season's patterns. Lila read aloud from his books, her voice filling the cabin with stories and poetry. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, Rowan working on some repair or project while Lila mended clothes or worked on the quilt she'd started. It felt like partnership, like the life Rowan had promised. But there was also a distance between them, a careful space neither quite knew how to cross. They were married but not intimate, partners but not lovers, bound by vows but still learning what those vows meant. One evening in early December, as snow fell heavily outside and the fire burned warm inside, Lila looked up from her mending to find Rowan watching her. What? She asked, just thinking how different this place feels with you in it, how it's a home again instead of just a shelter. Is that good? It's very good. He paused. But I wonder sometimes if you're happy, if this life is what you hoped it would be. Lila set down her mending and considered the question honestly. I'm not unhappy. The work is hard and I miss some things about town. Having other women to talk to, being able to buy things instead of having to make everything. But I don't miss the cruelty. I don't miss being invisible or being mocked. And I like... She stopped, feeling her cheeks warm. You like what? I like being with you. I like the way you treat me with respect, the way you value my work. I like that you don't expect me to be anyone but who I am. Rowan's expression softened in the firelight, and he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. That's all I wanted, for you to be yourself without apology. You're a remarkable woman, Lila. Strong and capable and kind. I see that every day. The words warmed her more than the fire ever could. But there was something else she needed to say, something that had been building inside her for weeks. I know you said you couldn't offer me love, she began carefully. That part of you died with Sarah and Emma. And I've tried to accept that. Tried to be content with partnership and respect. But Rowan, she met his eyes. I need to be honest with you. I'm starting to feel things I didn't expect to feel. When you smile at me, when you put your hand on my shoulder, when you call me by name, my heart does things I can't control. And I don't know if that's fair to you, if that's breaking the terms of what we agreed to. Rowan went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying I think I'm falling in love with you. The confession tumbled out in a rush. And I know that's not what you wanted, not what you signed up for. I know I'm probably just a project to you, a way to make up for not saving Emma. But I can't help how I feel, and I won't lie about it. So if that's going to be a problem, if that's going to make things awkward between us, I need to know now. The silence that followed was excruciating. Lila waited for him to gently tell her that she'd misunderstood, that his kindness was just kindness, that she shouldn't mistake respect for affection. She waited for him to confirm her worst fear, that she was indeed just a replacement, a stand-in for the daughter he'd failed to protect. Instead, Rowan stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension. You're not a project, he said, his voice rough. And you're damn sure not a replacement for Emma. You're Lila, your own person with your own value. I thought I'd made that clear. You did. But that doesn't explain why you're doing this, why you married me, why you're so kind to me. Because I wanted to. The words exploded from him with unexpected force. He turned to face her, and Lila saw something fierce and raw in his expression. Because from the moment I saw you sitting alone at that dance, something in my chest cracked open. Because when I danced with you, and you looked at me like I'd hung the moon for just treating you decent, I felt something I thought was dead and buried with Sarah. Lila's breath caught. What did you feel? Want, need, the desire to protect you, yes, but also, he stopped, seeming to struggle with himself. Also the desire to be near you, to hear your voice, to see you smile, to come home to you instead of just coming home to an empty cabin. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. I told myself it was just about making amends, about doing right by someone the world had wronged. But these past weeks, having you here, watching you make this place into a home again, Lila, you're not falling alone. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. You have feelings for me? I've been fighting them, Rowan admitted, telling myself I'm too old, too damaged, that I have no right to want you that way when I promised you a marriage of partnership only. Telling myself you deserve better than a scarred old hermit with ghosts in his closet. He crossed back to her, dropped to one knee beside her chair so their eyes were level. But yes, I have feelings for you. Strong ones. Terrifying ones. Lila reached out with trembling fingers and touched his scarred cheek. He flinched slightly, then leaned into her palm like a man starved for touch. Why terrifying, she whispered. Because I already lost everyone I loved once. The thought of loving again, of opening myself up to that kind of loss, it scares me more than any bear or winter storm ever could. His hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his face. But the thought of living the rest of my life keeping you at arm's length, pretending we're just partners when I want so much more, that scares me even worse. What do you want, Rowan? Lila asked, her heart hammering. Tell me plainly. He turned his head and pressed a kiss to her palm, his beard soft against her skin. I want this to be a real marriage, not just in name or legal standing, but in every way. I want to share that bed with you, wake up beside you, love you the way a husband should love his wife. I want to take the risk of caring for you even though it terrifies me. I want... His voice broke slightly. I want to choose hope instead of fear. Choose life instead of just surviving. Lila felt tears spill down her cheeks. Then choose it. Choose me. Choose us. Rowan surged up and pulled her from the chair, his arms wrapping around her with a desperation that spoke of weeks of restraint finally breaking. He held her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. "I don't deserve you," he murmured against her temple. "Don't deserve this second chance." "Yes, you do," Lila said fiercely, pulling back just enough to look at him. "You deserve happiness just as much as I do. We both spent too long believing we didn't deserve good things. Let's be done with that." He cupped her face in his rough hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "I love you," he said, the words seeming to surprise him even as he spoke them. "God help me. I love you, Lila Hale." "I love you too," she breathed. This time when he kissed her, it wasn't gentle or careful. It was fierce and hungry, a kiss that spoke of loneliness ended and walls torn down. Lila kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. She'd never been kissed like this, had never imagined anyone would want her with this kind of intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "Not rush, not assume. What do you want, Lila? Right now, in this moment." Lila thought about the partition she'd been sleeping behind for weeks, the careful distance they'd maintained, the marriage that had been real in name only. Then she thought about the loneliness that had defined her entire life, about all the years she'd believed no one would ever want her this way. "I want my husband," she said simply. "All of him. No more walls, no more holding back. I want us to be married in every sense of the word." Something blazed in Rowan's eyes, desire mixed with tenderness, passion tempered by care. "Are you sure? We don't have to—" "I'm sure." Lila took his hand and placed it over her heart, where it beat fast and strong beneath her dress. "I've never been more sure of anything." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it. Then he lifted her easily, as if her weight was nothing, and carried her to the bed behind the partition. He set her down gently on Sarah's quilt and looked at her with such reverence it made her breath catch. "You're beautiful," he said softly. Lila started to protest. She'd never been beautiful. Everyone had made sure she knew that. But he pressed a finger to her lips. "Don't argue with your husband," he said with a hint of a smile. "You're beautiful to me. You've always been beautiful to me." And in his eyes, Lila could see he meant it. Could see that when he looked at her, he didn't see the fat girl Cedar Falls had mocked. He saw a woman worthy of desire, of passion, of love. What followed was tender and careful and occasionally awkward, as first times often are. But it was also profound, a physical manifestation of vows spoken and promises made. Rowan treated her like something precious, asking silent questions with his eyes and hands, making sure she was comfortable, that she wanted this as much as he did. And Lila, for the first time in her life, felt truly seen, truly desired, truly cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together beneath Sarah's quilt, Rowan's arm around her and her head on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows, but inside they were warm and safe and together. "No regrets?" Rowan asked quietly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "None," Lila said. "You?" "Only that I fought this for so long. Wasted weeks we could have had. We have plenty of time ahead of us." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Yes, we do. A whole lifetime, God willing." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, the partition that had separated them for weeks standing open and unnecessary. When Lila woke in this deep of night, she found herself still nestled against Rowan's side, his breathing deep and even in sleep. She studied his face in the dim glow from the banked fire, the scars that marked him, the lines of grief and hard living, the strength that showed in the set of his jaw even in repose. This was her husband, not in pretense or legal technicality, but in truth. And she was his wife, chosen, wanted, loved. The thought still seemed impossible, like a dream she might wake from. But the solid warmth of Rowan beside her, the ring on her finger, the soreness in her body that spoke of intimacy shared, all of it was real. She had found her place in the world, not despite her body or in spite of it, but simply because she was herself, and that was enough for the man who mattered. Winter deepened its grip on the mountain over the weeks that followed. transforming the world into a realm of white and silence. Lila and Rowan settled into their new life together as true husband and wife, learning each other's rhythms and habits, finding joy in small domestic moments and passion in the long winter nights. Rowan taught Lila the skills of mountain survival with patient thoroughness, how to read the weather in the color of the sky, how to track animals through snow, how to preserve meat and make soap and tan hides. In turn, Lila brought warmth and life to the cabin in ways Rowan hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. She reorganized his chaotic shelves into logical systems, made curtains for the windows from spare fabric, insisted on small luxuries like wildflowers in summer and candles scented with pine. But more than the physical changes, Lila brought laughter back into Rowan's life. She had a quiet wit that surprised him, a way of seeing humor in everyday mishaps that made even failures entertaining. When she accidentally let the bread dough rise too long and it overflowed the bowl, coating half the kitchen in sticky goo, they spent an hour cleaning while Lila invented increasingly ridiculous explanations for what had happened. The bread was possessed, the yeast was actually tiny demons, the dough had developed consciousness and was attempting escape. Rowan laughed until his sides ached, a sound he'd almost forgotten he could make. And at night, in the darkness behind closed curtains, they explored the intimacy of marriage with growing confidence and deepening connection. Rowan learned what made Lila gasp and sigh, learned to read her body's responses as carefully as he read the mountain's moods. And Lila discovered that her body, the body she'd been taught to hate and hide, was capable of pleasure and passion she'd never imagined possible. "I never thought anyone would want me this way," she confessed one night as they lay tangled together, breathless and satisfied. Rowan propped himself up on one elbow to look at her, his expression serious. "Then everyone who made you think that was a fool. You're everything I could want in a wife and more. Even though I'm—" She gestured vaguely at herself. "Especially because you're exactly as you are," he interrupted firmly. "Strong enough to haul water and split wood. Soft enough to make this hard life bearable. Built to last, like the mountains themselves. That's what I see when I look at you." Lila pulled him down for a kiss, pouring into it all the gratitude and love she couldn't find words for. But despite the growing intimacy and happiness, there were still ghosts in the cabin. Rowan still woke sometimes in the deep of night, gasping from dreams of Sarah and Emma, his face wet with tears he wouldn't acknowledge in daylight. And Lila still sometimes felt like an intruder in a space that had belonged to someone else first, especially when she used Sarah's things. The rocking chair, the quilts, the dishes. The breaking point came on a bitter January night when Rowan woke from a nightmare so violent he nearly struck Lila before he realized where he was. She'd tried to comfort him, but he'd pushed her away and spent the rest of the night sitting by the fire, staring into the flames with haunted eyes. In the morning, the tension between them was thick as fog. They moved around each other carefully, speaking only when necessary. Finally, as Lila was washing breakfast dishes, she set down the plate she was holding, one of Sarah's good china plates, with enough force to crack it. The sound made Rowan look up sharply from where he'd been mending a harness. "Lila?" "No," she said, her voice shaking. "We need to talk about this. We need to talk about them." "There's nothing to talk about." "There's everything to talk about." Lila turned to face him, her hands dripping soapy water. "You're still living with ghosts, Rowan, still punishing yourself for not saving them. And I'm still feeling like I'm living in Sarah's shadow, using her things, sleeping in her bed, trying to fill a space that will always belong to her." Rowan's jaw tightened. "I told you, you're not a replacement." "I know I'm not, but do you? Because every time you wake up from one of those nightmares, every time you look at her rocking chair or her quilt, I see it in your face. The guilt, the grief, the feeling that you don't deserve to be happy because they're dead." Lila's voice broke. "And I can't compete with ghosts, Rowan. I can't make you choose me over them because that's not fair to any of us. But I also can't live in a marriage where part of you is always somewhere else, always with them instead of with me." The words hung in the air between them, brutal in their honesty. Rowan stood slowly, the harness forgotten at his feet. "You think I'm not choosing you?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "I think you're trying to choose me," Lila said. But I don't think you've forgiven yourself enough to fully let them go. And until you do, there will always be a wall between us. They were my family, Lila, my wife and daughter. I can't just forget them. Can't just... I'm not asking you to forget them, Lila shouted, surprising herself with the force of it. I would never ask that. They were part of your life, part of what made you who you are. But they're gone, Rowan. They've been gone for 10 years, and you're still here, still alive, and you have a right to live instead of just existing in some perpetual state of penance. You don't understand. Then help me understand. Lila crossed the small space between them, grabbed his arms, forced him to look at her. Tell me what you're so afraid of. Tell me why you won't let yourself be happy. Rowan's face crumpled, the careful control he maintained shattering like ice. Because if I let myself be happy, if I let myself love you the way I want to, then it means I've moved on. It means I've left them behind. And what kind of father does that? What kind of husband stops grieving and finds joy with someone else? The kind who's still alive, Lila said gently. The kind who understands that love doesn't end with death, but it also doesn't prevent new love from growing. Rowan, you can love them and love me. Those things don't cancel each other out. But I failed them, he choked out. I wasn't there when Emma needed me. I couldn't save Sarah from her grief. How can I deserve happiness when they're in the ground because I wasn't good enough? You didn't fail them, Lila said fiercely. Cruel people failed Emma. Grief and illness failed Sarah. But you loved them as hard as anyone could love. And they wouldn't want this for you, would they? Emma wouldn't want you spending the rest of your life punishing yourself. Sarah wouldn't want you living in misery as some kind of tribute to her memory. Rowan shook his head, but Lila could see she was breaking through, could see the dam beginning to crack. Listen to me, she continued, her hands on his face now, forcing him to meet her eyes. I refuse to be the consolation prize in your life. I refuse to be the woman you settled for because you couldn't have the one you really wanted. But I also refuse to live as a ghost in my own marriage, always competing with memories I can never match. So you need to make a choice, right here, right now. Are you going to let yourself live? Really live, not just survive. Are you going to give yourself permission to be happy again, to love again, without guilt or shame? Or are you going to spend the rest of your days half alive, using me as company, while your heart stays buried with them? The words were harsh, perhaps too harsh, but they needed saying. And as Lila watched, something in Rowan's expression shifted. The walls he'd kept so carefully constructed began to crumble, and what emerged was raw grief, not the old, familiar grief he'd learned to live with, but fresh pain mixed with something that looked like hope. I'm so tired, he whispered, so tired of carrying this weight, of feeling like I don't deserve anything good because I couldn't protect them. Then put it down, Lila said. Not forever. You'll always carry some of it, and that's okay. But put down enough of it to live, to love, to accept that you're worth loving back. Rowan pulled her into his arms and broke, sobbing against her shoulder like a man who'd been holding back a flood for years. Lila held him through it, her own tears falling silently, and felt the last barriers between them finally dissolve. When the storm passed, they sat together on the floor in front of the fire, exhausted and wrung out, but somehow lighter. Rowan held Lila's hand, studying the gold ring that bound them. I do love you, he said quietly. Not because you're replacing them, but because you're you. Because you're strong and brave and kind. Because you took a chance on a broken man and believed he was worth fixing. Because you make me want to be better, do better, live better. You're not broken, Lila said. Just scarred, remember? There's a difference. He smiled slightly at her words thrown back at him. Fair enough. But Lila, I need you to understand. Part of my heart will always belong to them. That's just truth. I know, and I'm okay with that. As long as you can save room for me, too. As long as you can be present in this life we're building instead of always looking backward. I can try, Rowan said. I want to try. They deserve to be remembered with joy instead of just grief. And you deserve a husband who's fully here with you. Then that's enough, Lila said. We'll figure out the rest together. Over the weeks that followed, things shifted in subtle but profound ways. Rowan began talking about Sarah and Emma not as sources of pain, but as people he'd loved and lost, sharing happy memories, laughing at funny stories, teaching Lila about who they'd been instead of just mourning who they'd never become. And Lila began making the cabin truly theirs instead of just his, adding her own touches, rearranging things to suit their life together, claiming space without apology. One afternoon in late February, Lila found the old photographs Rowan kept in a tin box beneath the bed. Instead of hiding them away again, she brought them out to the main room and showed them to Rowan. "Tell me about this one," she said, pointing to a picture of young Emma laughing at something outside the frame. At first, Rowan hesitated, as if afraid that talking about them would hurt too much. But Lila waited patiently, and finally he began to speak, describing the day that photograph was taken, a summer picnic by the creek, Emma's delight at catching her first fish, the way Sarah had laughed so hard she'd nearly fallen off the rock she was sitting on. "She would have liked you," Rowan said when the story was done. "Sarah, I mean. She would have appreciated your strength, your practical nature. And Emma—" His voice caught slightly, but held. "Emma would have been so happy to know that someone else got the chance she didn't, to be loved for who she was instead of mocked for it." "I wish I could have known them," Lila said honestly. "Me too. But in a way," Rowan touched the photograph gently, "in a way, you're giving them something even in death. You're proving that kindness wins eventually, that people like you and Emma deserve love and respect, and that good men can recognize that. They'd be grateful for that, I think." Lila took the photographs and found places for them around the cabin, not hidden away, but displayed openly. Sarah and Emma became a gentle presence instead of haunting ghosts, woven into the fabric of the life she and Rowan were building together. As winter began its slow release into spring, Lila discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually. Missed monthly courses, morning nausea, a tenderness in her breast that made even her loosest dress uncomfortable. When she was finally certain, she waited for evening when Rowan returned from checking his trap lines. "I have something to tell you," she said as they sat down to supper. Rowan looked up, immediately alert to the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." Lila took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." The color drained from Rowan's face. For a moment he simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he pulled his hand back as if burned. "Rowan?" Lila's heart clenched with sudden fear. "What's wrong?" "Sarah nearly died having Emma," he said, his voice tight. "The birth was long and hard, and there was so much blood. The doctor said if she'd tried again, it would have killed her." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "I can't, Lila, I can't go through that again. Can't watch you suffer, can't risk losing you the way I lost them." Lila stood and went to him, understanding flooding through her. Of course he was terrified. Pregnancy and childbirth had nearly claimed Sarah once, and in the end grief had claimed her anyway, tangled up with the loss of their daughter. To Rowan, a baby meant risk, meant the possibility of more death, more loss. "I'm not Sarah," she said gently, taking his rigid shoulders in her hands. "I'm built different, strong in different ways. And we're not in this alone. When my time comes, we'll go down to Cedar Falls, find a good midwife or doctor to attend me. We'll be smart about it." "You could still die," Rowan said flatly. "Childbirth kills strong women same as delicate ones." "Yes, I could die. I could also die falling down the cabin steps or getting kicked by a cow or any of 100 other ways." Lila moved around to face him, forced him to look at her. "But I could also live. Could bring a healthy baby into this world. Could give you the chance to be a father again. Not to replace Emma, but to honor her memory by raising another child with all the love and protection you wish you could have given her." "I'm too old to be a father," he protested weakly. "You're 43, not ancient, and you're the best man I know, patient and kind and strong. Any child would be lucky to have you as a father." She placed his hand back on her stomach. "I'm scared too, Rowan, terrified actually, but I'm also happy. This baby is a gift, proof that we chose life instead of just surviving. Don't let fear steal that from us." Rowan's hand trembled against her belly. "If something happened to you, then you would grieve, and it would be terrible. and eventually you would heal because that's what living people do, Lila said. But we can't live our lives in fear of what might happen. We have to trust that we're strong enough to face whatever comes. She watched the war play out on his face, fear against hope, grief against joy. Finally, slowly, he pulled her into his arms. "You're braver than I am," he murmured against her hair. "Or maybe I'm just more stubborn," Lila replied. "Either way, we're doing this together. You and me and this baby. A family." "A family," Rowan repeated, and Lila heard the wonder creeping into his voice beneath the fear. "God help us all." The months that followed were a study in transformation. As Lila's body changed to accommodate new life, Rowan threw himself into preparation with the focused intensity he brought to everything. He enlarged the sleeping area, building a proper bedroom with a door and a cradle he carved with meticulous care. He stockpiled supplies for the journey to Cedar Falls they'd make when her time came near. He read every book on pregnancy and childbirth he could get his hands on during trips to town, coming back with knowledge both reassuring and terrifying. And slowly, his fear transformed into something else. Not quite excitement, but a cautious, careful hope. Lila would catch him watching her sometimes, his hand moving unconsciously toward her growing belly before he stopped himself, as if still afraid to fully embrace what was coming. "You can touch," she told him one evening. "It's your baby too." Tentatively, Rowan placed his palm against her stomach, now rounded and firm. His eyes widened when the baby kicked, a strong flutter against his hand. Is that normal? That's strong?" "Perfectly normal. Your child is healthy and active." Lila covered his hand with hers. "A fighter, like both parents." Something shifted in Rowan's expression, a barrier falling away. "My child," he said softly, as if testing the words. "Our child." "Our child," Lila confirmed. In early September, when Lila was 8 months along and growing increasingly uncomfortable, they made the journey to Cedar Falls. Sarah Bentley welcomed them joyfully, insisting they stay with her and her husband rather than at the hotel. She'd kept her promise to stay in touch, writing letters that somehow found their way to the cabin via a complex network of travelers and mail carriers, and Lila had written back, sharing the story of her pregnancy and her fears. "You look wonderful," Sarah said, embracing Lila carefully around her bulk. "Absolutely radiant. And you," she turned to Rowan, "look terrified." "I am terrified," Rowan admitted without shame. "That's what it means to be a parent," Sarah's husband said kindly. "The fear never quite goes away, but the joy makes it worthwhile." They settled in to wait, days stretching into weeks as Lila's due date came and passed. Dr. Morgan, who'd come to Cedar Falls 5 years prior, examined her regularly and pronounced everything healthy and normal. But his reassurances did little to calm Rowan's anxiety. Finally, on a cool October morning, Lila's pains began. What followed was long and difficult. Not the nightmare Rowan feared, but no easy passage either. Lila labored through the day and into the night, with Sarah and an experienced midwife attending her while Rowan wore a path in the Bentley's front room, forbidden from the birthing chamber by convention, but unable to go far from it. Just before dawn, as the first light was breaking over the mountains, a baby's cry split the air. Rowan's head snapped up, his face a mask of hope and terror. Moments later, Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face wreathed in smiles. "You have a son," she said, "and Lila is well. Tired but well, come meet your boy." Rowan stumbled into the room on legs that felt like water. Lila lay propped against pillows, her hair damp with sweat and her face exhausted but lit with joy. In her arms was a squalling bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "Come here," she said softly when she saw him frozen in the doorway. Rowan approached slowly, as if moving through deep water. When he reached the bedside, Lila pulled back the blanket to reveal a red-faced infant with a surprisingly full head of dark hair and lungs that suggested he'd inherited his mother's strength. "Your son," Lila said, offering the baby to him. With shaking hands, Rowan took the child, cradling him against his chest with the careful reverence of a man holding something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. The baby quieted immediately, his tiny fist curling around Rowan's finger with surprising strength. "He's perfect," Rowan breathed, tears streaming unashamedly down his scarred face. "You're both perfect." He looked at Lila with such overwhelming love and gratitude that it made her own tears flow. "Thank you. For this, for everything, for being brave enough to choose this life with me." "We chose it together," Lila said. "All of it, the hardship and the joy, the fear and the hope. Together." They named him William, after Lila's father who'd failed her in life but whose memory she chose to honor anyway. And when they finally made the journey back to the cabin 3 weeks later, it was as a family, mother, father, and child, beginning their life together in the mountains. The years that followed were not easy, but they were rich with the kind of contentment that comes from work well done and love freely given. William grew strong and healthy, as sturdy and solid as his mother, with his father's steady disposition and his mother's quiet wit. 2 years later, a daughter followed, Sarah Emma, named for the grandmother and sister she'd never know, but whose memory lived on in the love that had made her possible. Rowan proved to be exactly the father Lila had believed he could be, patient and protective, teaching his children to respect the mountain and themselves, to value strength in all its forms, to treat others with kindness regardless of how they looked or lived. And when William asked about the scars on his father's face, Rowan told him the truth about the bear and the lesson learned, turning even his own imperfections into teaching moments. Lila thrived in her role as mountain wife and mother, her strength finding purpose in the endless demands of frontier life. She never returned to live in Cedar Falls, though they visited occasionally, and she noticed with satisfaction that the town treated her differently now, not as an object of pity or mockery, but as a respected woman with a family and a life of her own choosing. Mary Thornton, she learned, had married well but miserably, stuck in a loveless match with a wealthy rancher who valued her looks but nothing else. When their paths crossed during one visit, Mary looked at Lila, work-worn and weather-beaten but radiantly happy, with something that looked almost like envy. "You seem well," Mary said stiffly. "I am well," Lila replied simply, her children playing nearby while Rowan chatted with Mr. Calder. Very well indeed. And she was. Perhaps not in the way Cedar Falls measured such things. She had no fine dresses or elegant home, no social position or material wealth, but she had love and purpose and a place in the world that was wholly her own. She had a husband who cherished her and children who thrived under her care. She had work that mattered and days that felt full of meaning. She had chosen life instead of mere survival, and life had rewarded her choice. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Rowan made Lila a gift, a new rocking chair to replace Sarah's old one, carved with intricate patterns of mountains and flowers and 2 intertwined hearts. As she sat in it for the first time, their children already asleep in the loft bedroom Rowan had added to the cabin, she rocked gently and watched her husband tend the fire. "Do you ever regret it?" Rowan asked without looking up from the flames. "Choosing this life? Leaving everything familiar for a mountain and a scarred old man?" Lila smiled, her hand moving unconsciously to her belly where a 3rd child had recently begun to make its presence known. "Not for a single moment. This life, this family, you, it's everything I never knew I wanted and more than I ever dared to hope for." Rowan turned to look at her, the firelight catching the silver that now threaded his hair and beard. "I spent 10 years believing I didn't deserve happiness after losing Sarah and Emma. 10 years convinced that my life was effectively over. And then you walked into it, brave and strong and refusing to accept the world's judgment of you. You saved me, Lila. Gave me a reason to choose hope over fear, life over death." "We saved each other," Lila corrected gently. "You gave me the dignity of being wanted, when the whole world said I wasn't worth wanting. You showed me I could be loved exactly as I was, without apology or alteration. That's a gift beyond measure." Rowan crossed to her chair and knelt beside it, taking her work-roughened hands in his. "Here's to 10 more years," he said, "and 10 after that, and 10 after that, until we're so old we can't remember how it all began." "We'll remember," Lila said, leaning down to kiss him. "We'll always remember the harvest dance and the ring that changed everything, the pretend marriage that became real, the choice to love instead of fear." Outside, the mountain stood eternal and unchanging, indifferent to human joy and sorrow. But inside the cabin, warmth and love and life flourished, a family built on honesty and respect, on second chances and courage. on the revolutionary idea that all people deserve kindness regardless of their bodies or circumstances. Lila Hart had been Cedar Falls' unwanted girl, the target of cruelty and the object of pity. But Lila Hale was a mountain woman, a beloved wife, a devoted mother, and a person who'd learned the most important lesson of all, that true worth is inherent and unchanging, and that the right person will see it even when the rest of the world is blind. She rocked slowly in her new chair, her husband's head resting against her knee, and smiled at the life they'd built from the ashes of shame and grief. It wasn't the life anyone had expected for her. It was infinitely better. And as the fire crackled and the mountain wind whispered around the cabin walls, Lila sent a silent thank you to Sarah and Emma for loving Rowan enough to shape him into the man who could save her, and for their memory being honored not in perpetual mourning, but in the joy of a new family choosing to live fully and love fearlessly. The unwanted bride of Cedar Falls had found her home at last, and it was everything a home should be, filled with laughter and labor, challenges and comfort, and above all, the steady, enduring warmth of love freely given and gratefully received.